Welcome to Femmegineering, Women of Influence, the podcast where we highlight inspiring women who are breaking barriers, driving change, and making a difference. I'm your host, Hanna Abdel Hamid. Today, I have the pleasure of welcoming Kelly Spaulding, a dynamic leader in technology and a passionate advocate for community empowerment. As the head of delivery and project management at Cloud Adoption Solutions, Kelly brings a wealth of experience in bridging the gap between technology and patient care, particularly in the life science sector. Her work within clinical trial organization and technology consultancies reflect her commitment to using tech for meaningful impact. Beyond her professional achievements, Kelly is a dedicated activist and community supporter, actively involved with organizations such as the LGBT Center of Riley, VA Riley, and the Benjamin and Edith Spaulding Family Descendant Foundation. She's a lifelong learner, a yoga practitioner, and an equal admirer of both good coffee and loose leaf tea. She also has a deep love for reading, the arts, and travel. Kelly's journey is a testament to the power of representation, resilience, and continuous learning. And I am thrilled to dive into today's conversation with her. Kelly, thank you so much for being with me here today.
My honor, my pleasure, Hannah. Thank you for having me.
Kelly, can we start at the beginning? Can you tell me, how did you find yourself drawn to technology from an early age? And can you tell me about a specific moment or influence that really sparked this interest in you?
Sure. And actually, a bit of the comedy of that is I was not drawn to technology at an early age at all. Actually, I found it later in life when I was well into my adulthood, quite frankly. I will say that I had a natural curiosity and passion about the way things worked. And so initially, it just kind of started as more curious learning, more so than anything, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
That is also this kind of curiosity how I ended up in the Salesforce ecosystem, which is where I now have a career. But I think when I decided to turn something I was curious about or just found incredibly interesting, happened in a two-pronged approach. First of all, I had an opportunity to join the board for the LBGT Center of Raleigh and
Mm-hmm.
help them implement some new technology. That's kind of where it started. And then from that opportunity, I ended up at a Salesforce signature event called Dreamforce. And there was specifically at this event a talk called Women in STEM, well, women in the Salesforce ecosystem.
Mm-hmm.
And it's a pretty big breakout session. I mean, there had to be like 3 or 4 thousand people in the session. But I remember within the context of this breakout session, they talked about that only 3 to 5% of women of color were in STEM, were in the science,
Mm-hmm.
technology, and engineering market. And I remember looking around the room and seeing maybe 3 people that looked like me. And all I could think in that moment was that we're not here because we don't see ourselves. And literally in that moment, it became profoundly important to me to turn something that was just, a hobby, if you
Yeah.
will, do something more representative for it. Because although I loved it, I was also really aware in that moment, because I was living it,
Mm-hmm.
that women of color were not in that space.
I find it very enlightening that you're mentioning, how representation is important, and the fact that, if I get correctly, what sparked your interest or your desire to go in this field is the fact that it was, as you mentioned, only 3 to 5% women of color are in STEM, and you wanted to kind of break the pattern of not having enough representation. And it's very important because most of the time when I speak to young girls or when I do my workshops for women, lack of representation is actually one of the reasons why they don't see themselves in tech. So I really applaud you, and I find it so powerful when you discover that such a few amount of women of color are in this domain. Instead of being fearful, you decided to take your courage and kind of throwing yourself at a new challenge or something you're not accustomed with professionally, but just as a hobby. So this is actually great to hear, because I'm pretty sure this is going to encourage more women to follow into your footsteps. And Kelly, if I can ask you, what made you think that this is the right path for you?
Well, there are a couple things. And I'm sure you can appreciate this as well. I did not appreciate growing up that just because I could do a thing well
Hmm.
versus when I couldn't do something well, I didn't take that to initially mean that just because I couldn't do something well didn't mean I was supposed to do it. I internalized that very much. So, for example, liberal arts and things that have to do with culture and history and
Hmm.
language that are very normal and feel very natural and organic to me. Things like data and,
Hmm.
and mathematics is not my forte. And one of the things that I didn't have, and I don't think a lot of people have, is they think that, well, that's just not my thing and I can't do that. And what I learned, and if, there's one thing I would tell folks is that thing that resonates with you that you can do naturally, that feels really good, that you think you're supposed to do, that's your gift.
Hmm.
That is your talent. However, if you lean into things that are uncomfortable, that don't feel great and don't come naturally, but really put some grit into it, you can do those things too. There's absolutely no reason that you can't do both. And so it didn't feel natural and it didn't, there are a lot of times where, I have felt like, "Wow, maybe I'm not supposed to be doing this," but
Hmm.
the longer I do it, what I also recognize is how needed some of my gifts are in this space. And so, indeed, I have to do a lot of work and do a lot of extra studying and a lot of extra learning and do those things that are uncomfortable. But at the end of the day, my gift as well as my grit work holistically together and deliver a pretty great solution. So, it's trust the process.
I love how, you're saying my gift, and I believe it's so empowering because most of us, we have a lot of talents, but we don't see them, or it takes us time to see them. And we try to just focus on what we're good at. And what you're bringing here is find something that you're interested in and could be challenging and immerse yourself in it. So I want your opinion. How important do you think it is to take on these challenging tasks that we might feel are hard for us to do or don't come naturally for us to do, and go ahead anyhow and do them? And how do you think success can be achieved in these areas? And do you think as women we should push ourselves more to do these uncomfortable things that we don't think we can do?
Oh my gosh. So I'm not sure if you're familiar with a book by, I think his name is Malcolm Gladwell, and it's called Outliers. It was really popular several years ago, but
Hmm.
he's got a rule. He calls it the 10,000 hour rule, and it's a generalization, and I can't remember the person who came up with this rule, but what it basically states is that you need about 10,000 hours of knowledge, if you will, to become
Okay.
an expert at something. Since that book's been put out, they've done quite a bit of refinement over this rule. And what they have found out is that there are a lot of things that play into this 10,000 hour rule, such as focus.
Hmm.
Is it just 10,000 hours or is it 10,000 hours of really focused, concentrated learning? What's going on in your life? Like, are you balancing motherhood and elderly parents and all the other things?
Hmm.
The reason that becomes important as I answer your question is a lot of things that might look like failure right now based on what's going on in your life are not failures at all. It's part of your process. And so I would tell anyone, first of all, maybe reframe and redefine failures, if you will, and your process, because, I work in life sciences.
Yeah.
And in clinical trials, especially, there is the understanding that you're going to have several failures before you find a drug that's got efficacy. It's
Hmm.
literally into the process. So, the reason it's so important to take on things that may be hard and uncomfortable and to be persistent above all things is because there are probably micro breakthroughs happening all the time that get you up to a level of expertise that you don't even realize is going on. And success is not linear. Learning is not linear. It's very important to understand that it's a ebb and flow process, and it doesn't happen overnight.
Hmm.
And just because it might look like a failure right now, indeed, it really could be a milestone in a success.
That's a very important perspective. And it's true that most of the time, once we have a failure, we tend to, we tend to feel guilty about it. And sometimes it discourages us, from trying again. And I think it's very important, the perspective that you just brought in, that we should embrace our failures and see them as milestones. It's the first time I hear someone saying, let's consider failures as a milestone in our journey. And I find it it's a very refreshing perspective. And I think if we embrace it more, many people will persevere and be resilient and achieve what they want. So thank you for sharing this with us. And I wanted to move to our next question. We're talking about boundaries and challenges. And my next question is, what do you think, not what, sorry, why do you think we need more women in tech? And why do you think representation is so crucial in this field?
Well, I mean, this may sound pretty basic, but like we represent half we are half the world. We're 50%. And um, the reality is, as 50% of the population, how we show up to the table and our unique perspectives and the different roles that we have tremendous impact and tremendous influence across the globe. And so one of the reasons it's so profoundly important is simply I am just a firm believer
Hmm.
in that in the theories that we're proposing to help everything, it should be representative of the world that we live in. And quite frankly, until we've got 50% representation, it's not real world. It's just not.
That is true. And it's a very important message that we need equal representation, regardless, not just in tech, like in any domain, but especially in tech, because this is what is evolving. This is, the future. So I like your
Exactly.
idea. We're 50% of the world, so we need to be 50% represented in this domain. And I want to pursue the conversation and talk about a bit your career, because I know you haven't always been in tech. You have had a past life in a different domain. And I was wondering, how did that transition feel? What hurdles have you met? How challenging was that shift? And what key adjustments did you have to make?
Well, I've always had an interest in tech per se. I've always been what I like to call tech adjacent, meaning around. But
Hmm.
I had a career in marketing and in sales, both really, really super valuable to what I do today. Interestingly enough, my pivot to tech came from marketing, and it's not as big a shift as one might think, mainly because of how much marketing has changed. I would say, in the last decade, marketing, I think, used to be, back a while ago, more creatively driven. It was about a look and a feel and an intuition. And while that's not gone away completely, now those things are driven by analytics. And what does the data say? And how are people actually responding to the marketing? And what are the numbers? And what I found is that I entered marketing at that time and space when there was much more around a focus around how the numbers translated and
Hmm.
how translated and what behaviors marketing was trying to drive. So literally when I shifted into the tech space, it was literally shifting the question from here are the marketing numbers and what we're trying to achieve to how are we getting those numbers? Where are those analytics coming from? Where's that digital, where's that data coming from? How
Hmm.
is it driven? What systems is it going through? So it was kind of a bit of a narrative shift, but it wasn't as a big of a heavy uplift as one might initially think. It was literally a reframing of the question, if you will.
Okay. Well, that makes a lot of sense. And now, in your role as head delivery and project management at a woman-owned Salesforce partner, you're also helping shift the landscape for women in tech. And I wanted to speak more about representation on the business side. So, how rare are women-owned businesses in the Salesforce community? And have you noticed any changes in recent years?
I don't have any hard numbers, but I would be willing to guess that it's probably less than 5%.
Okay.
I've been really lucky though. I work for a woman-owned consultancy firm. I came from working for a woman-owned Salesforce consultancy firm. And
Hmm.
so I've been really lucky because even though the number I think is less than 5%, I've gotten to work for two of them. And I'm really happy about that. I do believe and I really hope that we're going to see an uplift, not just in women-owned businesses in Salesforce, but also women-owned businesses across the board.
Hmm.
There's also some data to back the fact that female entrepreneurs tend to be a little bit more successful in that I think it's 3 to 5 year runs where a lot of small businesses fail.
Hmm.
They tend to have a higher success percentage rate in that runtime, which I found really amazing.
Yeah,
And
it's reassuring actually.
and I don't know what that is. I have a theory. All the multitasking and different roles women have to play make us
Yeah.
inept. Multiple hats is my theory. But at the end of the day, I hope that we'll continue to see a lot of growth in that area because I think women definitely have a unique skill set to bring, and the numbers bear out that they have a higher success rate.
That actually, it's a very important point that you're making that women have higher success rate. And I hope, because I know there are many women who are trying to start their own businesses, but
Mhm.
because of the fear of the unknown or fear of failure, don't dare to do it. And I hope people who are listening to us, would hear that women actually have a higher rate at succeeding, and it will give them a push to start their own businesses. And beyond leadership roles, community engagement is another way women can build visibility and influence. And I know that you have been heavily involved in the Salesforce community. So, can you
That's
share more about that?
Yeah, so there are a couple of Salesforce community conferences that I'm very favorable. I have a passion towards. One is Southeastern Dreaming,
Hmm.
which is a Salesforce community conference, and another one is Life Sciences Dreaming, which is another Salesforce community conference. The story behind that is I think I've mentioned Dreamforce, which is a huge Salesforce event that happens every year in San Francisco. And it's a huge conference. I think outside of the pandemic, on average, it's like 170,000 people.
That's big.
I tell anybody that wants to spend time in this ecosystem, they absolutely should go to Dreamforce at least once, ideally more than once, because
Hmm.
I think anyone can fully appreciate all the capabilities and possibilities this platform can do unless they see that volume.
Hmm.
That being said, it can be and is an incredibly cost prohibitive event for small, medium businesses, for individuals. It's expensive and they can't attend. That being said, several years ago, one of the trailblazers, which is what we call people that are very active in this Salesforce community, got the idea of wouldn't it be great if we could bring Salesforce education and possibilities on a local level?
Hmm.
And when community conferences started, and most of them look very much like Dreamforce in the sense that they are about education and networking and showing you the different platforms or the
Hmm.
different possibilities that are available on the platform, but they're held usually in hotels or at community centers. And the idea is for folks not to necessarily have to travel, but to still get a little taste of what the much larger organization offers. And it's more on a grassroots level, but they also work really hard to find sponsors to drive down the cost so that
Hmm.
people can afford to attend to get this education and learning. So making making things more accessible to folks that don't have the same resources is pretty important to me.
Yeah.
So doing what I can to contribute to extend those opportunities and that education to people on a grassroots level is what that's about for me.
I like how, you mentioned bringing Dreamforce conference more on a local level to help with cost, because I find this is the kind of initiative that need to happen to make tech more inclusive, especially
Right,
to women, in the sense
right.
that, some women have kids and it makes travel to further locations harder. So they're being in some way discriminated against, if I could say, because they would want to attend, but because of the family situation, they can't. So I find this is very important to have more and more initiatives like this one to make tech more inclusive for everyone, but especially for women.
Mhm.
However, I tend to think even with this progress, women in tech still face double standards, especially when it comes to assertiveness. So I want to dive more into the whole idea of being assertive as a woman in tech. I recall in our last conversation, you mentioned something that stuck to me. And you said that when you're a woman and you're being assertive in tech, most or not just in tech but in other fields as well, you're often labeled as being aggressive, while
Mhm.
a man who is exhibiting the same behavior is seen as a leader. So
Yes.
can you share with us some experiences, or can you share with us some ideas of how as women we can navigate this bias and still continue to be assertive without being labeled aggressive or despite being aggressive?
Yes. So, it's a reality. The gender bias is a reality,
Hmm.
and I get it. It's not popular, it's not fun, but I think to act like it doesn't exist is the wrong thing to do because it does. As a problem solver, I tend to like to, in a perfect world, we could make it go away, but we can't. So, what's the way to handle it? Okay, we acknowledge it, it's there, but then I want to look for strategies around managing to it. And the reality is, we have to have some awareness of our audience. And
Hmm.
I am aware that when I speak to, and the fact that I manage to, and am in a lot of environments that are predominantly male, that my behavior could be perceived differently than if I were a man. And so I literally think about my audience. I also ask questions,
Hmm.
and I'm very strategic about not just what I say, but how I say it. And instead of me using an example of, as far as work goes, I will say this: we as women do this all the time, but we don't think about it when our children are fighting, you
Hmm.
know, although the reality is we know one may be the troublemaker or whatever, we have to be incredibly diplomatic to accommodate for both children. When we're at dinners or, family functions and we've got warring sides of the family, how many times have we acted as bridges over troubled waters, negotiating, if you will,
Hmm.
the differences to make sure everyone is getting along. We do this inherently anyway. We code shift, if you will,
Yeah.
in our family life all the time. And no, it's not ideal and it's not perfect, but here's what happens. The kids end up being fine and no one's mom's favorite, and we manage to get through the holidays and no one's killed each other.
Yeah.
So we get to the goal, right? And I very much think of the same thing a lot of times when I am in male-dominated spaces. I'm like,
Hmm.
"What's my goal here? What's my end game?" That being said, if I literally think about it in that way, I may take some of the messaging that I have, and I might massage it a different way. Not always, sometimes it's great the way it is, but, literally, if you think about what your end game is, strategic, just be strategic.
That is such a smart approach. As you said, as women, we have this capacity inherently because we have to negotiate either with our kids, and I love, when you said surviving the holidays, because it's true. At holidays, this is when, like, unfortunately, the most conflict happen because everyone is here, and it's always the mother or the elder sister or the aunt who's trying to make
Yes.
everyone as peaceful as possible. And we need to kind of play to our strength, if I could say it this way, when trying to be assertive at the workplace. It's a very smart approach. Thank you for sharing it with us.
Of course.
And another skill that is crucial for long term success in tech, because it's a field that is constantly evolving, is lifelong learning.
Oh,
How do you, yeah, and so how do you personally continuous education, and what are your thoughts on it?
so, lifelong learning for me is actually part of my vision statement. It is inherent to who I am, and I really believe in that whole mind-body wellness connection.
Hmm.
So, if I'm not learning, I'm not taking care of myself, in my opinion. And so, just like, it's important that I eat well and that I exercise, I have to learn. And
Hmm.
so, I literally block out time on my calendar to learn. I will say, I also think of learning much like eating. While we all have to eat to survive,
Yeah.
depending on, what's going on with your health or what certain needs that you have, all diets are not created equal and all
Hmm.
learning is not the same. I mean, there's so many kinds of intelligence. There's emotional intelligence and social intelligence and creative intelligence and spatial intelligence. And so, it's really important not to pigeonhole learning as a
Hmm.
whole. It comes in so many different ways and so many different forms because it's so vital to who I am. I do absolutely prioritize it. I do set my personal space up to support it.
Hmm.
Yeah, it's just it's part of who I am.
And Kelly, working a full-time job, I'm just trying to, I advocate for lifelong learning as well. And I'm someone who every 2 years I need to go back to school either to improve a skill that I have or get a new one. But let's say, you're a woman who's working full-time, you have kids. How can you manage that? How can you speak to your employer, let's say, to make it part of your daily task, to learn, because sometimes mothers can go back to school and study in the evening because they have like their second shift, which is
Right.
tending to their kids. So do you have
Right.
any advice for women who find themselves in this situation?
Yeah. So, like so many women that listen to this podcast, how many balls do I have in the air? Do I have time for focused learning?
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes I don't, but for me, especially like if I'm in the car and I'm driving, audiobooks,
Mm-hmm.
podcasts, those are super, super useful. Also, even in conversations like we're having right now, what are you reading? What have you learned? Having conversations with folks, that's been extremely helpful. I have very little downtime. I will say, even things like the use of AI has been extremely helpful in the sense that, I took a class recently, and by class, I mean, it was like an hour, but
Mm-hmm.
it taught me how to write prompts so that I could get information faster, if you will, about
Mm-hmm.
certain things that I was trying to put together. So it's been incredibly useful. And I will share a quick story with you. A
Yeah.
friend of mine told me this story because I was like, God, it's so tough learning about AI. Like, there's so much all the time. And she's like, yeah, you're right. She's like, I have found that it's really important for me to incorporate it in my day to day. And I was like, how do you do that? And she said, well, I have a young son named Malachi. And she's like most moms, she's like, Malachi, pick him up from school and I'll say, how was your day? And she's like, and he'll give me a rundown on how his day was. And
Mm-hmm.
she's like, and what I find is that when he's having dinner, I will take 5 or 10 minutes to go to my computer and type in notes about Malachi's day. She said, when I tuck him in for bed, she said, one of the things I will do is I will speak to the LLM and say, please give Malachi a 5 to 7 minute bedtime story. And she said, because AI keeps a running memory of all the different bits that she's put in during Malachi's dinner time, she can say things like, please give Malachi a 5 to 7 minute bedtime story. He's had a really tough day and doesn't remember how capable he is. So could you add elements that remind him of how smart he is? And so this little boy will get a bedtime story from the LI that will say, and remember, you made an A plus on your biology test 2 or 3 weeks ago, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And so it's beautiful because she's actually using AI to augment her parenting so that she can encourage her kid. And
Yeah.
she's two things. She's like, first of all, she's like, I don't have, she's like most people, I'm so busy. She goes, and reading the same story over and over again is a lot.
Yeah.
She was like, I have a very precocious child. He wants a new story every
Yes.
day. She's like, but what I love is being able to focus in on his emotional well being and what he needs, and that I have a repository of information that can literally give me some real life examples to reinforce behavior or empowerment or
Mm-hmm.
creativity so that he feels capable. And I'm like, that's it. That's a fantastic way to use this new stuff that we're
Yeah.
all experimenting with.
That is actually a very inspiring story. And I don't know if I've mentioned that to you, but I'm a mom of two boys,
Mhm.
and I have never thought of using AI to help me, like with something as mundane as storytelling, because, I'm the old school storytelling, I have to have a book and read from it or make up stories myself. But wow, kudos to your
Yeah.
friend. That is such like an imaginative way of using AI to
Right.
make everyday's life tasks easier and more enjoyable.
And I love it because the main character in her son's story is Prince Malachi. That's the
Yeah,
name of her son. So she literally has this entire narrative built around her son. But, like I said, the fact that AI keeps track of
yeah.
everything he's done during the course of the day, she actually has real world examples that she can use to, like I said, enforce good parenting. And I was like, that's brilliant.
Yep, I'm pretty sure people who listen to this episode are going to take notes and implement your friend's idea of having AI create stories revolving around their kids. And Kelly, if we can go back, into lifelong learning just for a second,
Sure.
as you know, learning, we have all been students. Sometimes it could involve failing and adapting and trying over and over again. So, how do you see failure fitting into professional growth? And how does the tech industry perceive failure? And do you think that women approach failure differently than men?
So lots of layers to that question.
Yeah.
I think one of the things that people really need to examine is their definition of failure. In software development specifically, we have something called agile. It's a
Hmm.
methodology. But one of the things about agile methodology is they reinforce the fact that when you're creating something new, it's an iterative process. It happens over and over and over, and it's refinement, refinement, refinement until you get it right. Refinement only happens because the last version wasn't quite what you wanted or what you needed.
Hmm.
Sometimes you don't know that until you refine it, you put it into play, or you practice with it and you went, not quite, right? I think right now, looking at the way a lot of people define failure is you try a thing, it doesn't work, you failed. Well, in software development, you're literally not only learning as you go, but it's part of the process. It's an
Hmm.
iterative, ongoing back and forth thing. Therefore, I've never, maybe not never, but certainly since I've been in the technology industry, I've never seen failure as not part of the learning process, because you literally have to, even if it's a micro failure, you literally, in order to get the best version of what it is you're after, have to see and it's an ongoing thing. And so, um, one of the other popular terms in Silicon Valley for a while was fail and fail fast. What that speaks to is
Hmm.
do it that you know what doesn't work, because that allows you to move faster to what does. And so, in terms of my gender, when we're learning to ride, when our children are learning to ride a bike, when they fall off, we don't be like, you failed. Sorry.
Yeah.
When they make a bad grade, it's not, well, guess you're not smart. It's a process. It's
Hmm.
it's it's learning is what it is. And so if we for me, failing by traditional standards, just it's not it that's not to say that there aren't things that aren't glaring failures, but I also see failures as learning opportunities to get better and to get closer to what's successful and what is a better version than it was. And so as a result, I tend to take that everywhere I go across the board. And when I take tests, which is often, I don't pass or fail, I pass or learn. That's what happens.
I love that. I pass or learn. And I hope more and more people will implement this ideology in their everyday life, because failure is a must. We need to fail in order to learn, and we need to persevere in order to succeed. But I find that most of the time we get discouraged so fast, or sometimes the society is expecting so much of us, and we just tend to give up as soon as we fail because we feel, either we have disappointed ourselves or we disappointed others, and we don't remember that actually failure is part of our life and we just need to keep on moving forward until we achieve what we want to achieve.
It's a very, very important part of, of everyone's life.
Hmm.
And if more people embody that, then, and the other thing well, two things. First of all, I think women as a whole don't give themselves enough grace for the different things. Most people don't give themselves enough grace for all the things that come into play when you're trying to do something new and different and unfamiliar, which
Hmm.
by learning its very nature is. So there's the fact that grace is not leaned into. And then the other component is, to your point, it's about perseverance, stay at it. They don't call them growing feel goods, they call them growing pains.
Yeah, that is amazing. Thank you, Kelly, for your thoughts on this topic. I find it very enriching and empowering as a perspective. And finally, as we wrap up, what's your advice for women pursuing a career in tech? And as I know that you're a long life learner, so I'm pretty sure you could share with us some must-read books or some interesting podcasts that people could learn from.
Sure. I think if I had to give a single bit of advice for anybody pursuing tech, first of all, your voice is so important. Like, I don't think women as a whole give their individual experiences enough credit. You being inherently you and that level of individuality is profoundly important and gives a filter on the data, the analytics, and all the things that go on in tech that allow a narrative, and that story needs to be told.
Hmm.
So that's the first thing. And then be persistent and understand too that you are going into a space that not only should have, but desperately needs your perspective, and that it's gonna feel maybe a little odd because they don't have enough of it. So get comfortable with the uncomfortable. That I would say that. I do listen to podcasts and books all the time. Let me see if I can give you a range of different books that
Hmm.
there's this great book. It's actually on my desk right now. It's called How Big Things Get Done. It's by Bent, and I'm gonna brutalize his last name. I think it's Jerk and Dan Gardner. But when I was starting to dive into project management, that book was fantastic for giving me some insight on how to tackle big, complex
Hmm.
projects. Loved it. There's another book called Big Magic. It's by Liz Gilbert. A lot of people know Liz from Eat, Love, Pray.
Hmm.
I'm a huge fan of her work. But one of the reasons I like Big Magic is because it's about using creativity to approach problems in life in general, which you don't hear a lot about in the tech world, but
No.
um, that is something that I think women, especially, we have got to be innovators all the time in our day-to-day lives. Like,
Hmm.
how are we gonna manage 4 kids and a spouse? And I mean, we do this. And so we can bring that same level of creativity to our jobs, and it's needed. There's another book that I read recently called 55 Underemployed and Faking Normal. It's by Elizabeth White. Such a great book. About one of the things I took from that book was not tying your identity up in your job, which I know a lot of men do.
Yes.
Women can be a little better about it because we have so many other different roles,
Hmm.
but nonetheless, when we have those failures that you and I were talking about, I think we internalize those, that they hit a little harder for us because we're like, "Oh, don't tie your identity to what's going on externally." And that book was tremendous for me about that.
Hmm.
There's another great business book called Never Split the Difference by Chris Voss. Great book about negotiating, some stuff that men do very normally, not just men, FBI agency, because that's what Chris Voss was. He was a hostage negotiator.
Hmm.
Things that might not feel very normal or innate.
Yeah.
Great book for just strategies around negotiating and learning how to play in the boys club.
I think, if I'm not mistaken, he also has a master class on the art of negotiation. If I'm not mistaken, it's him, because
It is.
it is, I believe, I can't recall. I've watched it, I think like early last year. and it was an FBI negotiator, a hostage negotiator, teaching people how, like, the art of negotiation. And I loved it. I loved his master class. I believe it's him, if I'm not mistaken. Yeah,
Ask got a class. Yep.
yeah.
But he's tremendous. And then there are two more. There's a book called The Other Significant Others. It's by Rihanna Cohen. She talks about in Western culture how there's this hierarchy of romantic love, if you will,
Hmm.
and how in other parts of the world, they don't, it's not the end all be all happily ever after. It talks about the importance of different relationships and how they can support and sustain you. And I
Hmm.
have found that that book really resonated with me. And the thing that I like about it for other women in general is don't be afraid, or you get to design your world. You get
Hmm.
to design relationships and networks that support you. And while that might not look like someone else's, that is really okay. And you should be empowered to do that. And the last book, and I just started reading it, but I'm super excited about it,
Hmm.
by all The Space That Keeps You. It's by Jeremiah Bryant. He's a designer and he's married to Nate Berkus. But as a person who works from home and also does a bit of traveling, my work environment kind of needs to not only support me, but support my life.
Yeah.
And this book is not a design book, is about the different things in
Hmm.
your space that support who you are. And so I'm very early into it, but
It looks promising.
yeah, yeah, I'm excited about it.
Well, Kelly, thank you for sharing all these amazing books with us. I'm taking notes, especially for Big Magic. I think it's going to be my next book to read. And what a perfect note to end on this episode with so much books to read and so much insight about how reading a long life learning could change our life, even if it's in the form of reading a book and not really following a class.
Hmm.
So, Kelly, thank you so much for sharing your journey with us. I find it so inspiring and so encouraging.
And thank you. It's been my pleasure. I appreciate you taking the time.
Thank you so much. And to our listeners, thank you for tuning in. And we hope that today's conversation has left you feeling motivated and empowered. Join us next time for another inspiring conversation with a woman of influence. And until then, keep striving, keep believing, and keep making an impact. Thank you very much.